Today we're going to talk about intimacy, which this is a little bit more of a personal topic, but intimacy is such an integral part of a healthy marriage. So we're going to define it. We're going to talk about some specifics to it. And yes, when I'm talking about intimacy, I do mean in the sexual way. So first of all, let's define intimacy, being a state of being close or familiar. So intimacy between a husband and wife is different than any other relationship you have. You are not intimate, certainly not sexually, with your parents or with your kids or your friends. Like the intimacy that is experienced between a husband and wife is like none other. That familiarity that you have. Some synonyms to kind of broaden that a little bit is the idea of belonging to someone or inseparability. That the connection between you as a husband and wife cannot be divided or separated, that you are together. You know, in Genesis, we see that concept brought forth in the oneness principle, that a man and a woman leave their parents and they cleave to one another. This idea that you become one. And that is, you know, by God's design, most aptly expressed through the sexual relationship. And so let's just say this, in a healthy marriage, then your view has to be, if you're one with your spouse, then that means you're not just your own anymore, that your body now isn't just about you. It's now about serving and caring for your spouse. And so we see Paul talk about this idea in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 3-5. So let's read that. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, or the desires that she has, from another translation, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife doesn't have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband doesn't have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come back together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So we see Paul talking here about this idea that a husband's body is now not his own and his wife's body is now not his own, and that there's this idea of giving the desires of the heart of your spouse, meeting those desires is part of your role. So if you're really having intimacy in a healthy way in your marriage, then your mindset has to start with, my body is now not just mine. So to kind of unpack that a little bit more, the attitude then needs to be, I have a responsibility to fulfill the needs of my spouse, that needs to be the attitude. So husbands, typically you have more of a desire in the sexual realm than wives, not all the time, but usually that's how it goes. And so the answer isn't, wife, for you to say, well, I don't want it as much, so too bad. And husband, your answer can't be, well, I want it, so figure it out. You have to come together and say, if we have the healthy understanding of what intimacy should look like, the answer is, let's figure it out. It may not be totally husband's way or wife's way, but we need to fulfill the needs of our spouse. You know, this passage is speaking specifically to the sexual relationship, but I think it applies in all areas. Husbands, if you're loving your wife and connecting to her and she's feeling loved by you, I promise and guarantee you that she's more likely to want to express herself sexually than toward you. So I think that concept applies on every area of the relationship to think, how can I meet the need of my spouse, not just sexually? The idea of yielding or giving in to those desires implies a conscious decision. And I think for both spouses, you really need to have that attitude of, even though it may not be what I need, if it's what my spouse needs, then I need to find ways to meet that need. And it's a conscious decision you make to serve your spouse. That's how healthy intimacy can come about. And then that last point is like what Paul said, is you need to make sure you have that coming back together, that if intimacy is a struggle for you, find ways to make that a healthy part of your relationship. Find your middle ground there, because it protects against infidelity. That's why affairs happen, because one or both spouses are not feeling connected or satisfied, and so they find it in another place. So there's definitely that idea of protect yourself from the temptations of the outside world, because you're not getting what you need from your spouse. So again, in intimacy then, this idea of belonging to your spouse is so important. And to think about that in the sexual realm, to think, I need to look for ways to meet the need of my spouse in that area. Here's a few questions to ask today. Has intimacy always been a struggle in your relationship, and why do you think that might be? Have there been times that you had intimacy was a more natural thing and it came along and it was great, and then something changed? Kind of try and pinpoint what that might be, and then start talking about what are some things we could do to kind of restart or start working on regaining that intimacy again. So take some time, talk about this idea of intimacy. I know it's kind of a harder topic, but so important to a healthy marriage.